One day the world changed, and a tower and gates appeared in it, from which monsters came out. These monsters mercilessly destroyed everything in their path, thereby creating chaos in this world. But with the appearance of these monsters, there were those who could stop them. These people had superpowers. They became a reliable protection for humanity. In the modern world, they were called players, who were a symbol of wealth and an example of envy for ordinary people who had no abilities. There was also a guy without abilities named Kim Gi-kyu, who worked as a food delivery boy in the office where all the chosen ones came to study. Returning from work, he immediately ran to check the mailbox and hoped that there was a letter for him. Looking through each letter, he wanted to see a letter inviting him to become a player, but unfortunately, it was not there. The guy came home and was met at the door by his sister. She told him how their mother was doing and explained to her brother why he wasn't sleeping so late. GQ decided to go check on his mother himself to make sure she was okay, and he felt relieved that his mother was sleeping better. When he turned to his sister, he saw that she was holding a cake in honor of his birthday. GQ was very surprised and couldn't understand where she got the money for this. The sister began to joke and then handed him the cake. The brother was very happy and happily thanked her for the pleasant surprise. But before he started eating the cake, the sister wanted her brother to read the letter, and he immediately began to open it without suspecting anything. When he opened it, Gi-chu's face turned white with shock, and in his hands he held the invitation from the Players Association that he had dreamed of for so long. Yujin was incredibly happy to see her brother so happy. She came up to him and hugged him tightly, and he couldn't believe that his life would finally change. The next day, Gi-chu was already standing in front of the Players Association gates and trying to get himself in the right frame of mind so as not to give in to his emotions. He knew that this was only the beginning of his journey and that many more trials lay ahead of him. When he entered, he was met by a female manager who congratulated him from the doorway. She immediately began to bring him up to speed and explained how he could check his player status. Gi-chu said the necessary words and a table appeared in front of him, showing his level, but the information about his abilities had question marks. When suddenly the girl screamed and said that he had unique abilities, and the question marks meant that they had not yet manifested themselves. The guy was so impressed that he started shaking. The girl calmed him down and said that the trainer would come soon and explain everything in detail. Suddenly a guy intervened in their conversation. Turning around, they saw that it was Yu Seok-woo, one of the best players, who decided to hold Gi-kyu himself. The guy was very surprised that a player like Seok-woo suggested that he learn from him. The manager didn't want to let them go at first because it was against the rules, but then she decided that she could resolve the issue and let them go. They approached the portal that leads to the tower, and the guy could not believe his eyes that all this was actually happening. When they both entered the portal, they found themselves on the first floor of the tower, where they discovered a lot of orcs. A slightly frightened Gi-chu asked the coach why there were so many orcs and how they would deal with them, but the coach replied that he himself had never seen such a number on the first floor. The trainer convinced the guy that he had nothing to fear, and that on the contrary, it was good that there were a lot of orcs. Thanks to this, he would be able to explain the whole essence of these trainings much faster. Seok-woo asked Gi-kyu if he knew about the 100 Goblin test, and the boy replied that he knew about it, but the test was banned due to its danger. He skillfully destroyed one after another, while simultaneously telling about the test with goblins, which was invented to reveal the hidden abilities of the player. The coach continued to explain without stopping that this test measures the player's potential based on the number of orcs destroyed in a certain amount of time. Gi-kyu watched the coach and was shocked by his skill. A player with unique abilities could cope with such a difficult task in a few minutes. Seok-woo made him understand that with such abilities, he should be able to complete the task very quickly, while ordinary players take years to achieve success. These players have such a fast rate of growth and their potential is beyond imagination. The coach then said that he wanted to create a guild that would surpass even the most legendary guild, Angela. For this, he needed capable players, and especially those with unique abilities like Gi-chu. He hoped that the guy would repeatedly go beyond his capabilities, and someday they would meet again in the tower. But first, the player needs to try to start his first hunt, and Seok-woo unfroze one orc that he left especially for the guy. Gi-chu took a stance and listened attentively to the instructions of the trainer, and thus began his first battle with the orc. Several years passed since that day, and Gi-chu continued to fight the goblins on the first level. But all this also took a lot of his strength, and he had to take a long time to recover from hunting one orc. At this time, the players were watching him. They felt uneasy because Gichu was so tired, and they were worried that it would be just as difficult for them to hunt. Meanwhile, the guy opened the information window and saw that his level was still first, which made him very angry. He began to hit the ground with his fists and scream at himself in anger. The players did not understand why he was so angry, and were very worried about it. Gichu's abilities did not manifest, and this made him even more angry, because in order to destroy even one orc, he spent an entire hour. Another training session with the newbies ended, and he praised them for a good hunt. They were all able to raise their level and were very happy about it, as they felt it was much easier than they thought. Gichu let the players rest and said that tomorrow they would be going through the second floor of the tower. He went about his business, and at that time the players began to discuss among themselves who he really was. They discussed the rumors that were going around about Gichu and his unique abilities, but they were just rumors. After all, if his abilities had manifested themselves, he would hardly have been a conductor. There were also rumors about his failures in battles, and that he was the only player who could not level up. Gichu heard their discussion, but he didn't care. He was sure that his abilities would soon manifest. When his work as a guide is over, the guy comes to his secret place on the first floor, knowing for sure that no one will disturb him here. Every day, one goblin appears in this place, which the guy hunts. He began to creep up on him quietly to begin the attack, but he knew that if he struck him quickly, it would still not be an easy hunt. When he was already very close, the goblin noticed him and immediately began to attack GQ. The battle was quite difficult, since the guy had no abilities and he had to spend all his strength to fight. After finishing, the guy took the crystal that was left behind by the orc and returned to the association. He sold them to buy a potion to treat his mother, but this money was still not enough. When he arrived at the conductor's department, he met an acquaintance named Theo. Theo was upset about something. The guy asked him what happened, but he just apologized and left. Gi-Q went into the office of the manager Tae-Shik-hyun and asked him about Teo, but there was no answer. In turn, the manager told the unpleasant news that Theo is now working with the players he trained today. The guy was shocked by such news. He did not understand why they refused to work with him, because the training went well. But the manager said that the problem was the rumors going around about him. They didn't want to be taught by a weak player with no ability. At that time, news about the achievements of Angela's guild was broadcast on television. Listening to this, the guy thought about how far he was from such victories, even though he was also a player. Without thinking twice, he turned off the TV so as not to get even more upset, because there was enough bad news for today. Afterwards, the manager handed him an envelope containing payment for a job well done. He asked Gi-Chu not to hold a grudge against Theo, as he already felt guilty towards him. Gi-Chu understood that Theo was not to blame for what happened, so he told the manager that he did not hold any grudges. Tae-Shik-hyun agreed with him and asked the guy not to be late for work. And in exchange for that work, a request appeared in his name. Gi-Q was surprised by this news, and he wanted to quickly find out who left him. The next day, he met with the new team of students, as well as Sung Pil, who said that he had heard a lot about the guy from Seok-woo. It turned out that Song Pil and Seok-woo were cousins. Gi-Q mentally thanked the coach for the nice comments about him. First, he decided to introduce him to the rest of the team, since Song Pil was the leader. The guy introduced 3 players named Jae-won, Sun-woo, and Kim Han-yul, who were also happy to meet them. He reminded them that they had 5 days to complete the training floor. Gi-Chu suggested not to waste time and hit the road, and he would tell the players everything else that would interest them along the way. After walking quite a long way and destroying several goblins, Gi-Chu decided that it was time for the team to take a break. Having settled down in a small clearing, the students began to set up tents, and Gi-Q began to prepare dinner. When the guide finished preparing the food, everyone gathered together and sat down to dinner, while at the same time they shared their impressions of the day's hunt. Gi-Q praised the team, saying that they should always be attentive and raise their level. Then they will definitely succeed. He also said that the main thing is not to meet the gatekeeper, a monster that is hunted by more experienced and larger teams. It is a patron spirit that is on each floor. In other words, it was a powerful monster that is the guardian of the gate. For such a monster, you can get a lot of experience points, but it is very dangerous, and low-level players cannot cope with it alone. The students were frightened and looked at the guide with stunned eyes. They clearly did not expect that they would have to face such a monster. But Gi-chu began to convince them that there was nothing to fear, and that the guardians of the first floors would be easy to defeat, and that they were not encountered so often on the other floors. A few days later, at another halt, everyone was busy with their own business. Passing by one of the students, Gi-chu noticed that he was keeping some notes. The guide asked why he was doing this, to which the student replied that he had been writing a diary since the first day of training and would write an autobiography in the future. The rest started chatting about how, in just a couple of days, they would be conquering the 5th floor and couldn't wait to raise their level. At this time, Gi-chu was sitting near the fire, and he was not at all happy about this thought, because his level was not rising. In the morning, the team was already hunting on the 4th floor, where the goblins were faster and stronger. So they decided to repeat their trick from the last battle to destroy the monsters faster, with Gi-chu watching them. While watching the students fight, Gi-chu noticed a wind with dust appearing in the distance. This meant only one thing: the guardian would soon appear. The guide started shouting at the players to finish the fight quickly and run for cover, otherwise trouble would be inevitable. He rushed to collect their backpacks with things in order to leave this place faster. The students were distracted from the battles for a few seconds to understand what the problem was, and this was enough to lose control in the battle. The orcs were causing a lot of damage to each player, and the situation was getting tense, as the slightest inattention could lead to the death of the entire team. Another premonition did not fail Gi-chu, and on the horizon he saw a huge guardian who was heading straight towards them. Having grouped together, they began to leave the battlefield, and in order to distract the attention of the keeper and the orcs, the guide threw a smoke grenade. Thanks to this, they gained some time to break away from the monsters. Then the guide showed them a shelter where they could hide, and they quickly headed there. When they got to the place, they tried to catch their breath a little to come to their senses. They began to examine everyone for injuries. Unfortunately, one of the team was poisoned by goblin venom and did not regain consciousness. The guide wanted to give her an antidote that would quickly cure her and reached into his backpack to find it. But there was no potion in the backpack, and Gi-chu realized that he had most likely lost it during his escape. The guy was angry with himself because he didn't understand how he could have made such a mistake. Then Gi-chu decided to go back to find help, and maybe he could find the potion. The players began to dissuade him because it was very dangerous outside, and they did not want anything to happen to their guide. The guide, in turn, convinced them that he knew this floor by heart, and that there was no point in them worrying. When he went outside, he saw goblins everywhere. He had to think of a plan and find another way. On the way, he thought over his plan of action, and he didn't have a single chance to make a mistake. Trying to move quietly so as not to be noticed, Gi-chu was only worried about not meeting the guardian. But as luck would have it, the keeper was already behind him and dealt him a strong blow, from which the guide was thrown back several meters. At that moment, a smoke grenade fell from his backpack and went off, thanks to which he managed to buy a little time. The guide quickly pulled out a pistol with signal lights and fired a shot, hoping that someone would notice and come to the rescue. Continuing to run in hopes of finding shelter, Gi-chu suddenly came across a gate that led to the 5th examination floor. For a second, the guide thought about rushing there and saving himself, but he understood that only death awaited him there. Hearing the sounds of the keeper approaching behind him, Gi-chu became very scared and realized that he urgently needed to do something. He had a choice: certain death or a possible chance of survival. It was better than staying here. Without thinking twice, the guide, with a quick and sharp movement, leaned on the gate, opened it, and entered the portal. Waking up after the fall, tables appeared in front of him. One after another, they informed him that his difficulty level had been reduced. Getting up, Gi-chu saw another window with the first task, in which he had to hunt a goat. Surprised by such an easy test, the guy passed it very quickly and destroyed the goat. The charts continued to appear before him, confirming that he had passed the test and that his untested abilities had appeared. Gi-chu was expecting some kind of catch, since he didn't believe that it could be so simple on the 5th floor. Suddenly, the conductor began to be surrounded by tentacles of shadows, forming a black shell, the center of which was him. Suddenly, a voice addressed him, which began to call the guide its master and asked him to establish contact with it. Gi-chu didn't understand how to act or what connection was being discussed until the system started giving him hints. The system alerted him that the ego had requested a connection with him, which he had to confirm, and that was the last thing he heard. Opening his eyes, Gi-chu saw his sister and the manager, who were very happy that he had finally come to his senses. Later, the manager said that the guy was found unconscious on the 5th floor a couple of weeks ago. The guild players noticed a flash in front of the entrance to the 5th floor, and then saw an enraged guardian and tried to chase him into a dead end, but he managed to escape. GQ began to worry about the team, because if the keeper escaped, then his team was in danger. But when they came to visit him, he sighed with relief, glad that they were alive and no longer in danger. After everyone left, and the boy was left alone, he decided to take a walk around the hospital and talk to his mother so that she wouldn't worry. Walking along the corridor, he wondered why, after passing the 5th floor, his level did not increase. However, something changed that day. He started to pass the tower again, and when he returned from clearing the gates, the other players looked at him with surprise and interest. Now there were different rumors about Jai-Q, which made him popular among other players, who gave him the nickname, the Tutorial Killer. Fighting orcs and goblins was much easier for him because he had abilities. Gi-Chu fought well, and with his new sword it was even easier and faster. He did establish a connection with the ego, and that was his unique ability. The boy gave him the name Lu, and now he could use his power and improve his skills. Now he could easily destroy goblins, and it took much less time than before, which he was certainly happy about. It all happened so quickly. It seemed like yesterday the guide was trembling at the sight of the orcs, and now his bag is full of earned crystals. But a month ago, he didn't even understand how to use this ability and what it was. Glad that it wasn't a dream after all, and he now had an ego partner, Gi-Chu immediately headed to the tower. For the first time in several years, he felt changes and he could not sit still, but wanted to immediately try out his new abilities. The only thing that was not clear to him was how to establish a connection with the ego so that it would manifest itself. Trying to focus on his thoughts, the boy remembered the conversation with Ego and how he gave him the name Lu. Suddenly, a ball appeared above him, and the system informed him that he had successfully summoned Lu's ego. Lu doesn't have a physical form yet, because the player doesn't have enough skills, so his form will be randomly generated. To create it, the ego absorbed materials in a disorderly manner, attracting everything and even the things that were on Gi-Q. When the ego stopped absorbing, its transformation into form began, after which a huge explosion occurred. Gi-Q lay on the ground the whole time, covering his face with his hand from the bright light, trying to see what was happening. In front of him, he saw a sword hanging in the air. This was the embodiment of the ego. Gi-Q picked up the sword and began to talk to it, trying to understand what it really was. The boy asked Lu if he could move on his own, but he replied that he couldn't move without his owner. He also said that he cannot change the owner and break the connection with him either, since only his owner has a choice. Hearing this, the boy asked Lu a few more questions about whether he could harm his owner if he moved around on his own, to which the ego replied that it could attack him, but if its owner died, then the ego associated with it would too, so that would not happen. He also said that he feels pain and has emotions if you turn them on. Hearing this, Gi-Q smiled sarcastically. Without thinking twice, the guy took the stone and turned on the pain sensations of the ego. He threw a stone at Ego with all his might to teach him manners, since he was speaking to him disrespectfully. It later turned out that Lu absorbs the blood of orcs, and this increases his level and experience points, as well as his stats. Now Gi-Chu's battles have become much easier, thanks to his ability to connect with the ego that had been wandering alone for so long. Having successfully completed another hunt, the boy decided that they could now go beyond the gate to earn even more crystals. When he returned to the office, he was met by the manager, who insistently asked him not to go outside the gates yet. He said that recently several players died there because they got into the wrong gate, and he didn't want anything to happen to the guy. Tae Shik-hyun was worried about him. He hoped that the guy would listen to his words and not do something stupid. The manager praised him for his work and sent him home. GQ nodded approvingly in response and left the office. As he walked out of the building, he thought about Shik-hyun's words, realizing that it was dangerous to go beyond the gate. But he had no other choice. He knew that he would earn more money outside the gates than in the tower, and that was his main goal. The guy took out his phone and started looking at the ads that other players had posted, who were also going to go beyond the gate and were looking for company. While he was looking through them, he mentally convinced himself that nothing would happen to him. Choosing one of the ads, he called and arranged a meeting. In the morning, GQ met with the team leader, whose name was Sung-soo, and they began to discuss their future work. Sung-soo gave the guy a contract that specified the nuances and privileges of the job, He made an appointment with him in a few days to go hunting. There were two types of gates. The first were one-time ones, which disappeared after they were cleared, and continuous ones, which were the ones in which you could hunt endlessly. But unlike one-time gates, continuous ones have a small reward, but the advantage is that there are fewer risks. So many people go there. The day of the hunt arrived, and as Gichu walked slowly through the tunnel, he watched the other players on the team. The guy noticed that the players in front of him looked awkward, and perhaps they had also come in response to the ad. Suddenly, Songsu ordered them to stop and wait. From the other end of the tunnel, they heard monsters approaching. A crowd of monsters was rushing straight at them. There were a lot of them, but the team was ready to fight. The first of them to attack was a player nicknamed Tank, who could hold back their advance with his shield. The leader shouted commands to each of the players, and everyone began to fight off the attack, trying to inflict as much damage on the orcs as possible. Gi Q, in one fell swoop, dealt with this crowd of monsters in a few seconds, destroying them one by one without exception. When the leader and other team members saw this, they were slightly shocked at how quickly the guy dealt with the monsters alone. After completing the journey, they decided to make a stop to rest and gain strength for the next battle. GQ was sitting to the side. Two of the team approached him. They began to thank him for his help, admiring his skill in battle. Hearing this, the guy laughed and said that he was just lucky, but the players continued to praise him. At this moment, Gi Chu looked at the leader. Such talk was unacceptable in his presence, although there was no reaction from him. Suddenly, the leader intervened in their conversation. He informed them that it was time to end their rest and move out. Hearing the leader's order, everyone began to gather. Gi Chu asked Ego if he was ready to fight and said that he would soon get something better than zombie blood. When they reached the wall of iron bars behind which the monster boss was located, Gi Chu was surprised at how huge they were. In turn, the team leader decided to discuss a plan to attack the gatekeeper, who was called Talon. Suddenly, one of the players began to interrupt the leader, citing the fact that they already knew everything, and there was no point in wasting time on pointless conversations. The leader reminded the player that he better listen to him again, because behind the gates, one mistake would put the entire team in danger. His partner saw how the player grimaced in displeasure at Songsu's words, and she was very angry at such disrespect. The leader noticed this and looked at her sternly. She felt his gaze even without turning around and immediately pulled herself together. Gi Chu had been watching them the whole time and thought it was very strange, but the leader continued to tell them the strategy plan. The team began to act according to his plan. Melting the grate, they went to the boss. They needed to climb on his back to destroy him. Songsu shot a deadly arrow at Talit, thus angering him. The Guardian was furious and began swinging his fists, fighting off attacks and attacking the players at the same time. Byung-hun, nicknamed Tank, had to block his attacks so that other players could get closer to the monster. At this point, the near and far shooters tried to inflict as much damage as possible to weaken him further. But the most important thing was that Talit, having cowered, could change tactics because of this. His defensive powers increased, so it was impossible to let him do this. As he bent over, GQ delivered a powerful blow that should have caused him a lot of damage and made the fight easier. Before approaching the monster, the system informed him that his fusion with Lu had increased, and he could use his power more effectively. When he struck the Guardian, he immediately destroyed it with his strong attack. The team, seeing this, could not believe their eyes. They were shocked, because it was very difficult to defeat such a monster alone. Signs began to appear before Gi Chu's eyes, indicating that he had acquired a new skill, cannibalism, which restored physical strength by eating monsters. When it was all over, the same players ran up to the guy and started asking him for his phone number, thus showing that he was a worthy leader. Sun Yamu interrupted them and pointed out that they had won a paralyzing dagger for the boss, which according to the contract had to be played out by throwing lots. But the tank began to persuade Gi Chu to take this dagger, and they would help him with this. Gi Q was not surprised by his proposal since, over the years of working as a guide, he had learned to see people, but he did not think that they would behave like this. Everyone sat in a circle to begin the drawing of lots, and Gi Q continued to watch Song Su and the girl whose name he didn't know, but he knew that there was something else hidden behind her calmness. Just as the leader began to take out the bones, Gi Q saw Byung-hun and Dai-O look at each other with a mischievous smile on their faces. Abruptly jumping up, Byung-hun began to attack the leader, pointing the dagger straight at him. When he approached Song Su, He didn't move from his place, as if that was how it should be. Right in front of his face, the tank's strike was intercepted by Gi-Kyu, sending him flying several meters away from Song-Soo. Lying on the ground, Byung-hun began to call for help from Dae-oh, since they were going to do this together. But he was very frightened and trembled all over with fear, so he did not do anything. Having neutralized it, Gi-Chu thought that if he had just a little more time, the tank would have been destroyed, because the girl was ready to repel his attack. He looked at her and saw how her eyes changed color, and in her hands she held a dagger, which he did not even notice at first. At the same time, he was very surprised by how indifferently and calmly Song-Soo sat when a knife was pointed at him. Gi-Kyu continued to hold Byung-hun while wondering what the leader would do with him. Behind him, he heard Dae-oh begin to defend himself by saying that he didn't know what the tank wanted to do. Song-Soo was surprised why he was asking him this, to which the boy replied that the leader was an interested party. Lost in thought, Song-Soo turned to the girl and called her by name, Ha-Rim, thereby giving her the command to act. Her eyes glowed red again and black energy formed around her. She moved so fast that in a few seconds she was already behind Dae-oh. The girl dealt him a short but powerful blow, from which he immediately fell unconscious. Gi-Kyu watched what was happening, and only confirmed his suspicions that Ha-Rim was very dangerous. Having finished with the first, she did the same with the second player, who also lay there without showing any signs of life. When she finished and returned to her seat, Gi-Chu picked up the dagger, saying that he would keep it for himself. He explained this decision by saying that he deserved this dagger because he saved the leader's life, but Song-Soo disagreed with him and considered it an exaggeration. But Gi-Chu continued to insist on his own, hinting to the leader that he could do without the dagger. Song-Soo asked if the guy knew who he really was, since he thought that the dagger would not be useful to him. Gi-Chu knew that he was no ordinary player since he had such a guard, but he didn't care about it. Pointing to the two players who had been lying motionless the entire time, he told them to decide what to do with them, and he needed to go hunt. He left silently, and on the way Lu approached him, saying that he was surprised that the guy didn't run away, and even dared to tell them what to do, taking the dagger. Gi-Chu decided that it was time to go out, because there were no more zombies, and he had absorbed enough of their physical strength, increasing his stats. Finally, before leaving, they decided to go into the reward room, where they had previously destroyed the gatekeeper. Gi-Chu noticed that something was wrong. He looked at the wall through which a bright light was shining, and confirmed with Lu that he was also seeing this for the first time. After knocking on the wall, he realized that it was empty, and decided to break it to find out what was hidden behind it. When the wall was broken, a lot of dust rose up, making it impossible to see anything. But Lu could sense that there was an ego somewhere there and told the guy about it, who was very surprised by it. Gi-Chu was surprised that this was possible, and why he hadn't found it before, but Lu just laughed at him and said that he needed to look for it here. When the dust cleared, the boy saw the Excalibur sword sticking out of the stone in front of him. He didn't know what to do, so he just grabbed it, trying to get it off the rock, and it easily gave in. A pure white space appeared in front of him, almost the same feeling as when he met Lu. It was the ego inside the sword. It was waiting for its owner and asked Gi-Kyu if he was that person. The guy replied that it was not him, but he would be happy to become its owner. Then the ego asked to give it a name. Gi-Chu confidently said that now the ego's name is L, and the ego accepted his choice. The white space dissipated. Gi-Kyu continued to hold the sword in his hands, examining it. Suddenly, he saw that everything around him began to crack, and the ceiling along with the walls began to collapse right on top of him. In one voice, the ego began to tell him to leave here quickly, but he himself understood this perfectly well. When they heard each other, they started talking to each other, which distracted the guy even more. On the way, he saw Talon's body in another room, which he needed to get to as quickly as possible. Gi-Chu tried to concentrate to find a way out of this trap, but it wasn't that easy. Trying to move very quickly in order to run into another room, he saw that the floor under his feet also began to collapse. He only needed to touch the Guardian's body to move, and with maximum effort, he still did it. But at the last moment before moving to another room, he saw something strange, a huge eye that was looking straight at him. When he returned home, the news was abuzz that the continuous gate had disappeared, but Gi-Chu was above suspicion since it had disappeared sometime after he had left. All he thought about was how to get a reward in the form of crystals for passing through the gates and sell them to support the payment for his mother's treatment. He also began to climb the tower again, having overcome the 5th floor, where he was once found unconscious. And following him, he passed other floors, thereby raising his level, although he could not even dream about it before. Seok Woo was right. You can't give up, and Gi-Kyu didn't do that and was able to reveal his unique abilities. The guy was glad that his ego levels were increasing, and thanks to their fusion, he felt stronger. He thought that it was also connected with the fact that he had a sealed demon with him, or maybe that giant eye was a demon. He himself didn't know for sure. His ego had the ability to transform into an accessory in the form of a ring that he wore on his fingers, and the stronger his ego was, the stronger Gi-Kyu was. Looking through the information tables of his egos, he decided that he needed to find another one, and he knew exactly where to look. Gi-Chu came to the auction, where various items useful to players were being raffled off and sold. Sitting in the room among other people wanting to buy something, Lu and Elle tried to feel the presence of ego in each lot, but unfortunately, so far without success. The last main lot was brought onto the stage, the Bracelet of Wounds, which increases the speed of recovery from wounds. At that moment, the egos unanimously said that this bracelet is the ego. The auction ended, and Gi-Chu was a little upset because he was unable to get the bracelet as it was beyond his means. The only thing the guy was happy about was that he was able to sell the paralyzing dagger for good money. On his way home, Shik-hyun called him to ask if he was okay. Gi-Kyu started complaining that he was having a hard time finding a good team and that he didn't like the previous one. When the manager heard that Gi-Kyu had gone outside the gate, he started to swear loudly because he was worried about him and didn't want him to take risks. But the guy began to justify himself by saying that in the tower without equipment, he would not be able to move from the first level and would not receive a player rank. After the conversation, Gi-Chu thought that he could continue his advancement in the tower, but his ego needs blood, so this is not the place to hunt. Besides, there was a good income behind the gates last time, and that was the most important thing for the guy. Whatever the case, he wanted to earn money quickly and move to another city so that his sister would be in a safer place. Absorbed in his thoughts, he walked home, but suddenly he saw a strange light in front of him, which grew larger and larger. As he got closer, Gi-Chu saw that the point of light was expanding faster and faster until it turned into a gate. Immediately after the gates appear, they do not pose a danger, so you need to call the association service and leave a request about it. It is also dangerous to enter the gate of an unknown level without confirmation of the association. The player can even be sentenced to imprisonment for breaking the rules. The first person to witness their appearance receives priority to attack the gates for 5 days. At that time, Shik-hyun saw the announcement of the gate's appearance, that it had appeared near Gi-Kyu's house. When the manager saw that the applicant was the guy himself, he was very shocked by this coincidence. A few minutes later, there were already a bunch of experts from Shik-heng's administration at the gate, who had to verify the accuracy of the information and find out what level they were. After completing the inspection, one of the experts warned Gi-Kyu that if he did not enter the gate within 5 days, the priority right could go to auction. After which the manager called the guy to talk to him about this matter in private. They went into a nearby cafe. Shik-hyun ordered a cocktail and drank it down right away. He asked if Gi-Chu was ready to go beyond the gate alone, to which the boy replied that he had become much stronger than he thought. Shik-hyun thought the guy was very stubborn, as he always did things his own way, despite his requests not to take risks. After finishing with the questions, the manager gave Gi-Kyu 4 days to prepare, after which he was supposed to come to him, but the guy did not understand why this was necessary, to which the manager replied that if he was poorly prepared, he would not let him go anywhere. 4 days later, Shik-hyun brought the boy to the training hall. It was in the basement of the association, a wide space that had a protective layer on the walls. While the guy was looking around the room, Shik-hyun asked him if he liked the idea of joining the association, but not as an employee now. Gi-Kyu thanked him for the offer, but he did not want to commit himself, as he had other goals. The guy also asked about Theo, because when Hen became the boss, the conductor department was removed, and he was wondering where he was now. Shik-hyun said that Theo joined the Carbon Guild, and after that it was as if he became a different person. Gi-Kyu was happy for him and decided to call him later. Gi-Kyu was surprised that Shik-hyun didn't bring a weapon with him, since he said he wanted to practice with it. But he in turn said that the guy was seriously underestimating him if he thought that he couldn't cope without it. He raised his hand and released his internal energy at Gi-Q, showing him that he was still good at fighting. Shik-Hyun saw confusion in the boy's eyes, but he calmed him down, telling him not to worry and to attack him immediately. Gi-Chu tried to focus, knowing he couldn't beat him, but he wasn't going to stand still either. Before he could even begin, the teacher suddenly began to attack him first. He was so close that if he had been a little closer, Gi-Q would have missed the blow. The guy was able to block his attack and jumped away from Shik-Hyun, dodging the blows while trying to keep his distance. The teacher stopped and asked the guy if he was really preparing for the fight, since the top rankers outside the gates were different, and no one would feel sorry for him. He got angry and shouted at Gi-Chu to pull himself together, because if he was distracted even for a second outside the gate, he would die. Gi-Q understood that he needed to pull himself together, otherwise nothing would work out, but the guy had something to surprise the teacher with. 4 days earlier, Gi-Chu entered the in-game item market to buy himself some new equipment. There were a lot of ordinary people in this market, so he couldn't communicate with his egos as usual. He took out his phone and pretended to talk to someone. They didn't understand why he came here. He was already strong, to which the guy told them that his protective equipment was weak and he needed new ones. Besides, here he could try his luck and stumble upon the ego, which was an important aspect for him. Walking among the shops, he looked at different types of equipment, but they were quite expensive. The prices were too high and he could not afford to buy such equipment. He sat down on a bench and thought about how it wasn't easy to find what he needed. Everything was either too expensive but good, or cheap but very bad. Suddenly, his thoughts were distracted by the ego, which pointed to the boy. He was standing there like a craftsman and furiously proving something to the adults. Gi-Chu heard the boy say that his grandfather was a great master and that he made equipment well, but no one believed him. They cited the fact that the store was doing very poorly and that the equipment his grandfather sold did not even show information about the item. The boy was very upset by this. He really wanted to help his grandfather. When the people dispersed, Gi-Q approached him. He asked him to take him to his grandfather's shop so that he could buy something for himself. Hearing this, the boy, without hiding his delight, immediately agreed and took Gi-Q to the store. As they walked down to the shop, Gi-Chu asked Lu and La again if they were sure there was an ego there, to which they replied that even the boy's things were imbued with its power. When they entered, the boy called out to his grandfather with delight to show that he had brought him a visitor. But the grandfather was not too happy with this news, as he asked him not to bring anyone. Gi-Q followed the boy in and smelled some good stuff, to which his assistant said that all that was there was ego. The guy couldn't believe his eyes. On the shelves lay parts of the ego that had no self of their own. The blacksmith immediately told the guy that he didn't have any items suitable for him, and that he wouldn't understand their value anyway, so he wouldn't sell him anything. The man didn't want to waste time, as he was sure that the guy was the same as the previous visitors, who didn't even know how to use it. Gi-Q told him that he would sell him the item if the boy could use it. But the blacksmith stood his ground, allowing the boy to only look around, but then ordered him to leave. The guy walked up to one of the shelves, picked up a sword, and began to read the description of the item. At that moment, the blacksmith's face seemed to turn pale. Jumping up from his seat, the blacksmith was delighted that someone who could see the abilities of objects had come to him. Then the man allowed the item to be used because Gi-Q knew its value. It was the blacksmith's greatest desire. Gi-Chu began to demonstrate his skills with pleasure. He gave the sword a name, Edge, but it did not react in any way. Ego didn't like the name the guy gave him. He was a little upset, so he put the sword back in its place. Shik-Hen stood motionless, waiting for the attack. The boy began to quickly approach him to strike with 2 swords. The teacher, without even moving from his place, repelled his attack with one swing of his hand, throwing him aside. After which, Shik-Hyun shouted for the boy to use all his strength and aim for his vital organs, because with such attacks he wouldn't even scratch him. Gi-Chu knew that his opponent was a former top ranker. He needed to focus, and that it would be difficult to defeat him. He began to attack the teacher again. This time he tried to do it quickly, but he deftly dodged every blow. As Shik-Hyun was about to receive another attack, he swung his arm to strike back. Gi-Chu didn't understand why he couldn't establish a connection with the ego, having already sorted through a bunch of items, to which Lu replied that the ego was picky in choosing its owner. He and L established a connection with it because there was no other choice, but it doesn't work that way with everyone. The guy walked up to the next shelf, without any hope that it would work. He tried one last time to establish a connection with the object. He touched it, and said its name, Brunhart. When suddenly he succeeded and the connection with the object was established, Brunhart had the skill to reflect accumulated damage. But the guy could not use all of its abilities, since most of them were lost. The teacher struck with such force that Gi-Kyu flew back several meters and hit the wall, but he still managed to use the reflection. When he tried to get up, he saw the bottles that Shik-Hyun had thrown to him in front of him. He told the boy to drink this. The bottle contained a potion for internal damage, so he could quickly recover. Gi-Chu took the potion, wondering why such an expensive thing was in such a bottle. His hands were shaking so much that he couldn't even unscrew it. The teacher was pleased with Gi-Kyu's result, as he really didn't think the boy would be able to scratch him. He understood that this was not an accident, but a carefully thought-out plan, and he was wrong to underestimate it. The teacher asked what it was, to which Gi-Kyu replied that these were all his subjects. When they returned to the gate, Shik-Heng explained once again that if the gate was not cleared within a week, the association would send agents there. He only gave the guy 5 days to clean up, and if he didn't come out during that time, then Shik-Hyun himself would come and get him out of there. But Gi-Kyu convinced the teacher that there was nothing to worry about and that he could handle everything on his own. Shik-Hen checked again whether the guy had taken everything with him and asked him not to relax, even though this was not a difficult level. Lu asked the guy why he was so worried if the level was the same as the last one with zombies, to which he replied that Hen was like a father to him, so he was worried. They said goodbye and Gi-Chu entered the gate. He hoped that it would be a continuous gate. Lu didn't understand what difference it made what kind of gate it was. Gi-Chu explained that you could make more money there. The guy will only understand whether this gate is continuous or not after he clears everything. It was F rank. Unless it was a difficult tower type and there were no labyrinths, he would be able to clear it quickly. After finishing their conversations, wolves approached Gi-Chu, and he began to clear them out, despite the fact that there were a lot of them. Destroying the wolves one by one, he did not stop for a second until he had completely cleared the cave. Lu and L's levels and skills increased time after time. Brunhard deftly reflected the accumulated damage. When he finished clearing the place, he suggested that he take a little rest, as he had been fighting for 5 hours without a break. Wolves were not much different from orcs. It seemed that they were even easier to destroy, probably because they were F rank. Gi-Kyu took out some food from his backpack to have a snack, and continued to talk about how in his situation it was difficult to get here alone, but he was very lucky. He thought that he needed to increase his level, and since the level measurement takes place without equipment, he would be at level 1. Because he will be at a distance from the ego, he will not be able to receive a normal assessment. L suggested that if the guy developed his abilities, then the ego would be able to establish connections with him at any distance. But Gi-Chu didn't even know how he could develop his skills to increase his level. The guy decided that he could deal with development later, but he was still confused by one detail. Looking at Lu's information window, Gi-Chu was confused by only one point: cannibalism. He thought about the fact that the ego can eat its own kind. Hearing this, Lu was shocked by the owner's conclusions, but the guy calmed him down and said that it was just a joke. Gi-Kyu had enough rest and continued to follow his plan. His backpack was filled with crystals. He thought he needed a new one with expansion magic since there was very little space in this one. The guy started looking for a way to free up some space in his backpack, and his attention was drawn to the enhancement potion. Walking a little further, his ego felt a strong energy ahead, which meant that the gatekeeper was already close. The guy took out a potion of enhancement and drank it, due to which his stats increased and gave him more strength. He continued walking, but there was still nothing ahead, and the potion was about to wear off. But the ego convinced him that they were very close. The boy saw a light ahead, which meant that Lu was right and the keeper would appear soon. When he came out of the cave, he saw the guardian. The guy realized that he was different from the boss he attacked earlier. The guardian noticed Gi-Kyu and stood up and was ready to attack. He seemed much stronger and impressive in size. The guy also noted that the pressure that came from this boss was different from what Talon exerted. This one was a real monster boss. Without thinking twice, the monster began to attack the guy, defending his territory. Gi-Kyu fought off all his attacks, and in turn tried to inflict at least a little damage. He struck the guardian with his sword, but he was unable to hit him deeply, as the monster constantly dodged and attacked again. After his blow, the monster threw the guy forward several meters. His blow was so strong that the guy had to help himself with swords to stop. The monster's attacks were stronger than he thought, and all he could do was accumulate damage and wait for the right moment. It was a long battle because the opponent was very strong, but Gi-Q was a professional in this fight. He continued to fight off the monster's attacks, trying to inflict at least a little damage on the enemy. When enough damage had accumulated, he reflected it back at the Guardian, thereby immobilizing him. The monster could no longer attack. It lay motionless on the ground, and the guy sat next to it and tried to catch his breath after the fight. The guy felt that the effect of the potion was starting to wear off, and he also admitted that if it weren't for Brunhart, they would hardly have won so quickly. Looking at the monster one last time, he thanked it for falling by his hand and plunged his sword into it. After the Guardian was destroyed, Lu's stats and skills began to increase, and he could now quickly recover if he received heavy damage. Also, the monster's blood activated his cannibalism skill, which hadn't played any role before. After activating this skill, Lu began to absorb the Guardian's body, after which it was successfully transformed into an ego. When it was all over, a large crystal appeared in the place where the monster's body had been. The guy, not understanding anything, began to ask Lu what happened, but he replied that he had never heard of a monster transforming into an ego before. Then he asked L if he knew anything about it, but he also couldn't help him. GQ couldn't fully understand where that ego was that had transformed from a monster. He decided to open an information window. There he saw that this ego had appeared in him, but he still did not understand how to use it. Gichu decided that he would deal with this later, as he had more important things to do. Having stood up, the guy began to list what he managed to do today. The first was that he checked the cannibalism skill and how it was useful. The second thing is that he got a blue crystal which was more valuable and more expensive than the usual ones. Now all he had to do was go to the reward room and return home. Suddenly he realized that he couldn't do this, because in order to return to the room he would have to touch the body of the gatekeeper. But the Guardian's body was absorbed by Lu, and now getting out of there was much more problematic. GQ began to search for the Guardian, hoping that at least some part of him remained inside the gate. Lu and L tried to convince the owner to just go out and not waste time. But the guy couldn't do that because if he didn't find another way to get out, he would be in big trouble. If he went out, the gate would break and it could harm people, so he had to find another way out by any means. Besides, in 4 days, Shikhen was supposed to come and get him out of there. So he would be able to avoid the worst turn of events, but still, he understood that it was better to manage to leave before he arrived. The next day, the guy also combed everything around, but found nothing. Sitting down by a tree, he decided to have a snack and think about what to do next. Thinking, he decided to destroy all the other monsters, hoping that this would help. They passed through all the caves that they had previously skipped in order to get to the keeper faster, but now they destroyed all the blue wolves. On the 5th day, the guy finished with the last monster and didn't understand what to do next. Because Tae Shik-hyun was supposed to come soon, but he still couldn't find a way to get out. Suddenly, the ego turned to the guy, drawing his attention to the place where all the energy inside the gate was collected. He asked them where exactly this place was, and they pointed to the field where the gatekeeper was. A few hours later, Gi-Q was taking a shower with Shik-hyun, who kept asking the boy about the gate. The teacher didn't understand why the boy stayed there for so long. If his abilities were good enough to handle it in a couple of days, Gi-Q said that he dealt with the Guardian that same day. But then a small problem arose because of which he was delayed. Shikhen was surprised. What problem could there be if he destroyed the monster? The guy explained that after the destruction, the keeper's body disappeared, and he could not return to the reward room. He also told Shik-hyun that he had to kill all the remaining monsters, which is why he had so many crystals. Continuing, he said that when he caught the last wolf, all the energy inside the gate began to gather in the boss room. When he saw this flow of energy from the room, he hurried back into it as quickly as possible. But when he ran into that room, he saw something incredible that was difficult to describe in words. It was as if pieces of the world were accumulating in one place, shimmering with rainbow colors. A ball of energy appeared in front of him, which he touched and received fragments of the ego, thereby moving into the reward room. Shik-hyun looked at Gi-Q in confusion. He didn't understand what it meant, and the guy suggested that perhaps the gate was the ego. After they discussed everything, Shik-hyun said that he would transfer the money for the crystals to his account. Gi-Q thanked him and decided to visit his mother and sister in the hospital so that they wouldn't worry about him. Shik-hyun offered to give the guy a ride in his car, but he wasn't particularly happy with the offer. The teacher was surprised why the boy didn't want to go with him. He thought that a real man's car should be pink. He still gave the guy a ride and continued to admire the car, but the whole way GQ felt ashamed, trying not to comment on Shik-hyun's words in any way. Upon arrival, GQ went into his mother's room to see how she was feeling, and she asked him to go get a drink for his sister to perk her up after her sleep. When they left, Shik-hyun stayed with his mother, and she began to thank him for looking after GQ. While walking down the hallway, Yoo-jin started to yawn, and GQ asked why she was so sleepy if it was just dinner. She answered him that exams were coming soon, and she had slept a little, but now she would continue studying. GQ asked her not to overdo it, otherwise she might get sick, to which she replied that he could buy her a guardian amulet so that everything would be fine. Suddenly they met a grandmother who was walking alone down the corridor. Yoo-jin asked why her grandmother wasn't sleeping. She replied that she wanted to take a walk before going to bed and heard her voice. She turned her attention to Gi-chu. She took his hands and began to praise his sister for such a good upbringing. When she held his hands, she said that he had a very good aura. The guy was grateful to her for the nice words. Granny apologized for distracting them from their walk and said goodbye to them. When they had moved a little away from her, she suddenly called Gi-chu to her. She warned him to be careful. Several different energies were colliding within him, and because of this, he could lose himself. Gi-chu looked at her in surprise, not understanding what she was talking about or how she could know such a thing. As she left, she wished him to overcome all the difficulties that lay ahead for him in the future. The guy wondered why she suddenly decided to warn him and whether she could really know something about him. The next day, Gi-chu felt much better as he finally got to sleep in normal conditions. When he left the room, the doctor who treated his mother approached him. Gi-chu was a little nervous. As he did not understand why he was called, the doctor asked to give him some time to discuss the patient's condition. The players happily discussed the end of the hunt and planned their further rest, standing near the gate. Suddenly they saw a guy arriving who was planning to enter the gate. The players recognized him as the same tutorial killer, Gi-chu. They were delighted by the unexpected meeting and wanted to approach him to greet him. But suddenly they stopped, seeing his expression, which was distorted with hatred, and there were very good reasons for this. His mother's condition was critical, although it was not noticeable externally, but her muscles were badly damaged. She also developed serious complications, although Gi-chu took very good care of her. But there was another unknown reason that was having a bad effect on her health, but the doctors could not determine what it could be. Gi-chu was so shocked by what he heard that it felt like his heart was breaking into pieces. He couldn't believe that this was actually happening. The last thing the boy heard before his eyes were covered with a veil of hatred was that his mother had at worst a few months to live. That day, he went beyond the gate and began to destroy everything in his path, destroying monsters one after another. Gi-chu blamed himself for hesitating for so long and not being able to muster the courage to continue working on himself. He took out all his anger and resentment on the monsters in the tower and didn't think at all about the consequences. The guy scolded himself for the fact that it took him so long to gain the strength he has now. Then all this could have been avoided. They saw how their master was suffering and they felt very sorry for him. Lu also tried to reason with him so that he would not completely lose his head. The players who came to hunt on the 19th floor were attracted by a strange noise behind them. When they turned around, they were shocked by what they saw. Gi-chu looked very exhausted, and the stubble on his face and the pile of backpacks on his back indicated that he had been in the tower for quite a long time. Suddenly, someone from the crowd offered the guy to share his load, but the offer sounded as if he didn't really intend to help. When everyone turned around at the sound of the voice, they saw the Smurf Guild, whose leader was smiling slyly and not taking his eyes off Gi-chu's backpacks. The guy didn't react to his offer, so the leader repeated his offer once more and headed towards Gi-chu. With a sharp movement, Gi-chu stopped the guy with the tip of his sword, thereby maintaining a distance between them. The leader did not expect such a reaction from Gi-chu and warned him that he would be in big trouble, but this did not play a weighty argument. Gi-chu looked at the boy as if he was ready to destroy him with just a glance, letting him know that he should not covet what was not his. He continued to hold the sword in the same position, not allowing the enemy to move. Suddenly they heard a voice. The guy turned around and saw a representative of the association approaching them. Sharply dodging Gi-chu's sword, they began to run away to avoid trouble, leaving they threatened the guy that they would get even with him. As the man came closer, he began to ask Gi-chu what had happened. Having calmed down a little, The guy turned to the man and looked at him with distrust. The representative immediately showed him the documents, thereby confirming that he was indeed the security guard of this floor from the Players Association. Then GQ said that the red players tried to steal his things, and he simply did not let them do it. Security guard Song Hoon smiled indulgently at the guy, noticing the number of backpacks on his back. The guard also asked GQ if he was the player they were looking for, and when the guy heard this, he was very surprised. He returned home and immediately hurried to Shik-hyun to find out what had happened and why he was looking for him. Song Hoon asked the guy to be sure to say that it was he who found him and brought him to the boss, for which he promised to give him a bonus. GQ still didn't understand what could have happened and why the teacher was looking for him. But Shik-hyun argued that there had been no news from the guy for 2 weeks, and because of this, he began to worry about him. Gichu was surprised when he heard this. He thought that this was not a reason to worry so much, but there was something else. The teacher said that there was another reason why he was looking for him. He found a way to cure his mother, and hope immediately appeared in the boy's eyes. Shik-hen said that there is a method that can cure a disease whose cause is unknown. Gichu knew what it was about. It was a panacea elixir that could cure any disease, but it was not so easy to find. The teacher confirmed the boy's guess and wanted to remind him of several cases when this elixir was found. But Gichu himself began the story of how the elixir was first awarded to the guy who passed the 50th floor first, and the others came out as a prize for clearing the gates. Shik-hyun was surprised that the boy knew about these stories, but Gichu said that he had also looked into the matter. There was a similarity between those gates. They were both labyrinth gates. They differed from ordinary ones by the presence of monsters of different levels, with different traps, and a strong guardian. Shik-hyun also said that a third labyrinth gate appeared in the States. They were considered as gates beyond the level, so everyone could try themselves there. The teacher sent the boy home to get himself in order and pack his things for the trip. Gi-kyu left the backpacks with crystals in the office, since the teacher himself would count everything and send all the money to him. The next day, Gi-kyu met with the guard Sung-hoon, who would be escorting him to the gate. Song-hoon warned the boy that his boss had taken care of the arrangements for his stay in the States and had prepared everything necessary for him. When they had discussed everything, the guard suggested that the guy not delay and quickly set off on his way. But suddenly Gi-kyu stopped him and asked him to wait a little, as he had some unfinished business. Gi-chu passed the 20th floor of the tower and increased his ego fusion skill. In the information window, he saw that he could only use less than half of his skills. The guy was approached by Song-hoon, who had been waiting for him to finish the exam the whole time, saying that it usually takes about an hour to complete a floor. Gi-chu agreed with him, but did not understand why he suddenly asked about this, to which the guard enthusiastically replied that only a few minutes had passed. He stopped short and suggested getting back to business, but Gi-kyu suddenly began to worry that they were late for the plane. Sung-hoon calmed him down, saying that this was not their transport. They went to the 5th floor where there was a giant tower of incredible size. Because the zones are separated, it is rare to meet players from other countries, but the tower is connected to all parts of the planet. They arrived at the tower and headed towards the elevator. Riding it up, GQ was surprised how it worked without light. Song-hoon explained that he works on crystals, and that it is a large artifact like the tower itself. For a second, the guy imagined how expensive it is. When they reached the right floor, Gi-chu was shocked by what he saw. It was the control center of the transition portal between countries. Passing by various portals, Gi-chu never thought that he would ever use one of them. Having reached the necessary portal, the guard offered the guy a ride on the fastest transport in his life. He laughed, and they entered the portal. In Los Angeles, they got into the car and headed to the labyrinth. On the way, GQ read the news about who else would be in the gate clearing. 3 top rankers, who were much stronger than the guy, expressed a desire to participate in capturing the gate. Because of this, he began to doubt his abilities. The car stopped, which meant that they had arrived at the 3rd gate, called the Labyrinth of the Geryon. The gates were securely fenced and surrounded on all sides by military personnel with their equipment. Not far from the gates, other players noticed the new arrivals and tried to figure out who these people were. One of the players, using his ability, tried to see the level and skills of Gi-chu. But suddenly he was surprised. His level was 1st, his stats were also 0, and his unique abilities were not visible at all. At this time, Gi-kyu and Sung-hoon were already standing next to the representative of the American Association. It was difficult for the guy to talk to him, since he did not know the language. Players wondered how Gi Chu got here with the first level. One of the girls' players was watching the guy because she liked him right away and decided that the most interesting things were yet to come. As soon as they entered the labyrinth, battles with monsters began almost immediately. Sung Hoon was the guy's partner, and they fought together against huge monsters. They formed tactics to quickly and efficiently destroy monsters and move on. After finishing with another huge spider monster, they exhaled and decided to take a little rest. Gi Q was glad that he got such a partner, but Sung Hoon should have already returned back. The guard confirmed that he had been there long enough and that it would take him quite some time to get home. Gi Q thanked him for his help and for helping him quickly get used to the labyrinth.